Roll it.
There it is.
Oh, yeah, I got to respond here. Got it. And then it blew away the full screen. Okay. These toys don't work well together.
There we go.
It's back.
I'd like to get rid of this panel up at the top, but I haven't figured out how to do that. So anyway, here we go.
Thank
We
you.
don't see it, Charlie.
An introduction. Waterfowl include a lot of species. There's swans from large to small, geese, medium-sized, ducks. And within ducks, and I'll show you examples soon, there are diving ducks, dabbling ducks, and a special group called mergansers, which are fish-eating ducks. And these are water birds, but they're not waterfowl. Common loons and pied-billed grebe occur on Cayuga Lake, but technically, according to my definition, at least here, they're not really waterfowl.
What's the definition then?
Swans, geese, and ducks.
Yeah, but if they're in the water, aren't they waterfowl? Or is it the word fowl?
You might use two words and call them waterfowl. I think it is derived from the federal definition for protection purposes of what these birds might be called as a group. And it may go back at least 100 years or so to 1918. It's a political thing. This doesn't always make sense.
Political ducks.
Yeah, political ducks. So we see these, I see them on the lake and in other places, but they're not technically waterfowl. Now, in the Cayuga Lake Basin, which is very carefully monitored if you subscribe to any of the web services, we've got a large proportion of North American waterfowl. It's a relatively small group compared to songbirds, 57 species in North America, 47 in New York State, and right here in the Cayuga Basin, if you're diligent about it, you might see in a few years 40 or so, but it's easy to go out in a single day and see 20 or so waterfowl. So somebody says the host has spotlighted my video for everyone, whatever. First about swans, they're the largest. Tundra swan, used to be called whistling swan, have become increasingly frequent in the wintertime since the 1970s when I arrived here. Used to, it was an exciting thing to see a tundra swan on the lake. Now we see literally in a day hundreds of them. They're doing well. Here's a flock of tundra swans at the north end of the lake. The best place to see waterfowl is the north end of Cayuga Lake. It's more shallow and the birds are able to get more food more easily there. Trumpeter swan, I'll come back to this elegant bird in just a moment. They have occurred historically in the Northeast, that being in the 19th and early 20th century. They were extirpated by market hunters before there was protection afforded to them. A swan makes a much nicer dinner than a turkey. There's a lot more meat on a swan. And I think they taste better than turkey, but I haven't tasted that many. So trumpeter swan is the second of the native swans. And then, oh, and here's a little detail. How do you tell those two big white swans apart? You need to look very carefully. The forehead on a trumpeter swan at the base of the bill is in the shape of a V, and on a tundra swan or whistling swan, it's in the shape of a U, if you use a little imagination. The head color in the tundra swan on the right is a result of its foraging in probably waters containing iron before it arrived here. So, and then we have mute swans on Cayuga Lake. They're introduced. They're much more common in the Hudson Valley. They're a problem species. There's a season on them in the Chesapeake Bay because they're aggressive toward other birds that feed on vegetation like canvasback duck. And they're a problem in that they can tip up, which I'll show you in a minute, and with the long neck reach to the bases of plants that other waterfowl can't pull out of the substrate. They literally pull up the plants and swallow them. So this makes it difficult for some of the ducks like canvasback that feed often on plants. And then geese we're all familiar with, Canada goose, year-round population estimated at around 10,000 birds on the Finger Lakes area. Probably a male top left, definitely a female bottom right. They like to nest on muskrat houses at Montezuma Refuge. And it's not unusual to see hundreds and perhaps in some cases even thousands of them, depending on the time of year, out in the stubble fields around Cayuga Lake. The availability of waste corn from mechanical harvesting has been a boon for canvas or for Canada geese, and it's Canada geese, not Canadian geese. They are in Canadian waters, but they are still Canada geese. And this bird was also rare in the early 70s, snow goose. It was exciting to see them migrating through, headed north in March sometimes. Beautiful bird. A snow goose is a grazer, actually. If it can find green grass, it'll pluck it and eat it, just like Canada geese. But in the wintertime, if they can get to a stubble field with waste corn in it, that's where you'll find them. And there is a form of snow goose that used to be thought to be a species of its own, the blue goose, or looks like a gray goose to me. It's just a color form, and it was a graduate student named Graham Couch at Cornell University that described this for his PhD thesis back in the 50s. And you can see lots of snow geese if you go to the right places. They're one of my favorite scenes in the wintertime, the white birds with the black wingtips soaring out over the stubble fields. 2 years ago in March, Claudia and I were on Cayuga Lake looking at waterfowl. It was a great day. It was sunshine. Temperatures were warm. And I guesstimated something of the order of 1 million snow geese. And that's a small number compared to where they overwinter on the Chesapeake, on Cayuga Lake and around Cayuga Lake. And the sky was like this the whole time we were out, with these birds arriving mostly from the Chesapeake Bay. Two large overwintering areas in North America, the Chesapeake Bay and the Gulf Coast near the mouth of the Mississippi. Now we'll dabble in dabbling ducks for just a while. They feed by tipping up. So they're the ones that are going to be in shallow waters where they can reach usually the substrate beneath the water and pick up plants. They're largely herbivores, but they won't pass up a snail if they have a chance to grab one. These are both mallards here, at least I think so from the look of them. And here's a comparison of the female and the male provided by Wikipedia. Beautiful photograph in this case. And this is the American Pekin duck, which is also a mallard. Probably a long time ago, it was derived from mallards in China. And if you see a big white barnyard duck, it's a Peking duck, and it's the same species for all purposes as the mallard. And when you see it like this, it's still a Peking duck or a mallard. And if you've never had Peking duck, I recommend it highly if you've got some time to spend in a Chinese restaurant. It's a lot nicer than preparing it in your own home. I roasted one once, and it took 2 or 3 days to get the smoke out of the house. I imagine that's why you see them hanging sometimes in some meat shops. So this is the form of Peking duck I see most often. And if you've been to Long Island, there is the big duck. Historically, Long Island was the world center for propagation of Peking ducks for the table. No longer true, but there's still a statue to Peking ducks on Long Island from that period in the mid-20th century. Teal come in 2 flavors, blue-winged teal and green-winged teal. They're both dabbling ducks. These are both males, and they're just extraordinarily beautiful. The green-winged teal is the smallest duck in North America. The body without the feathers is only about the size of my fist. And if you look, can you see this dot on your screens? Don't know what transmits. I've got a green dot on the head of the blue-winged teal. Can you see it?
Oh,
No. Okay, it doesn't transmit then. The head shapes and colors of teal, the males are important. There's this white crescent on the front of the eye and in back of the bill on the blue-winged teal, and the green and brown head of green-winged teal is quite attractive too. And the wings do have blue and green patches on them. This is one of my favorite birds. This was a photo taken at Montezuma Refuge. Female on the left, male on the right. The northern shoveler has got a shovel-like bill. It uses that bill to sift water, literally, and catch whatever small aquatic organisms are in the water, mostly arthropods, anthropods, and sing things like that, little crustaceans. And here's how they do it. If you've ever seen pictures of the baleen plates on a baleen whale, imagine them several thousand times smaller, and you have these lamellae, they're called, on the beaks of most dabbling ducks, but they're very conspicuous in the northern shoveler, and this is a female northern shoveler. And they use this literally to sift or strain the water. So as they grab a mouthful of water and force it out with their tongue, the small aquatic organisms get trapped here, and of course the duck swallows them. Those of you, I see Fred Warner's with us today. If you've tied flies, Fred, you probably value the feathers of gadwall, the male on the left, the female on the right. Subtly colored, a beautiful, beautiful duck, just absolutely extraordinary. If you want to see some really extraordinary photos of gadwall, talk to Bob Horn. He's got some beautiful ones. I think they're on your calendar this year, Bob.
They were, yes.
And this is the star that most everybody knows. Wood duck is spectacular. The male, the female less so.
Okay.
And when they fly overhead, they're
Huh? You're on your. Yeah, this is City Club guy, Charlie Smith. He's really very
okay.
ornithology, fascinating.
Hi, Bob. Thanks.
TIA, because I got all sorts of messages. sent.
No,
Okay.
they dropped me or something.
Oh, that's too bad. I see your face. Well, anyway, if you see these ducks flying overhead, unlike the other ducks, they have a distinctive tail, which helps them to get into tree cavities where they nest. It's square. So if I see a waterfowl flying overhead and I look at it through binoculars and it has a square tail, then it is most likely a wood duck. A success story here. In the early 20th century, they were virtually extirpated because they're a popular target. There was no regulations of hunting in the early 20th century. And by providing nesting boxes now for these birds, they've recovered to a fairly substantial population now. And then last but not least, diving ducks. The one that's the most common on Cayuga Lake during the winter time, with flocks literally of hundreds of these, and maybe during migration even thousands, is redhead. It's well named. This is the male. And here's what a flock looks like on Cayuga Lake. This is just a remarkable duck. If you see a large flock, or they call them rafts, of diving ducks out on the lake, they're most likely redhead ducks. My wife can distinguish them from miles away without using binoculars. And then there's other divers, not as spectacularly colored perhaps, but bufflehead, beautiful little duck, canvasback, common goldeneye, and ringneck duck are frequently on Cayuga Lake. They all feed by diving. In the case of the canvasback, they'll dive to pluck underwater plants, or they'll dive to find mollusks, perhaps like zebra mussels and snails and such on the bottom or in among the rocks in the lake. And this is my favorite diving duck. I guess I like the color. They're a small duck. They're not frequently seen on Cayuga Lake, but if you look hard, you'll see them, especially in the springtime when they have a beautiful blue bill and white cheek. Mergansers, a specialized group of ducks. We have only 3 kinds in our area here. And I was curious about the name merganser. I hadn't thought about it before, but should have known this from my years of Latin in high school. From the Latin mergus, which is Latin for diver, and anser, which is Latin for goose. So it's a diving goose. Not really, but it's close enough. And again, this is a little beauty, hooded merganser, the male. These birds are cavity nesters too, like wood duck. There are other species of birds in the diving or dabbling duck category that nest in tree cavities, and the hooded merganser is one. The bufflehead was another, and of course the wood duck. And common merganser. In the time that I've been studying birds in New York, we've done two breeding bird atlases, and this bird is increasing its distribution throughout the state. They nest in tree cavities too, and I imagine it's because there are perhaps more larger trees along the rivers and streams in New York State as forests have matured over the years where they've not been cut. And these birds are doing very well. These were two birds that I saw on Dryden Lake. Dryden Lake, when the ice is out in the springtime and fall, is a great place to see waterfowl. And here's a internet shot of a red-breasted merganser, which is more a merganser of the seashore, but we do see them on Cayuga Lake, and they show up from time to time. Beautiful birds. And here's a internet photo of what the teeth, if you will, on the beak of a female red-breasted merganser look like. They are indeed designed for grabbing and holding on to fish, and the beak that you can see at the end is a little bit hooked, so they're well equipped for catching, holding on to, and eating fish that they dive for. In general, waterfowl as a whole are doing well across North America. Green here is good. Blue, Southern Ontario, I believe there is really excellent. And then there are a few places in the Midwestern pothole areas where drought has affected the potholes, which are pools of water out in the middle of the prairie, that the numbers of populations in 2012, the most recent year for which I could find a map like this, are pretty well. In general, birds associated with wetlands, either open water, swamps, or marshes, are doing well in North America. And so why is that? Well, conservation is the answer. It began with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918, originally between the United States, Canada, later adding Mexico, and most recently adding Russia, because we share waterfowl with all these other countries. And it was the basis for regulating the hunting, or the taking as it's called in the political circles, of waterfowl. So for the first time in American and Canadian history, we had it illegal at certain times of the year to take waterfowl for food or sport. So they're carefully regulated, carefully monitored by the US Fish and Wildlife Service now, and they've generally shown recovery over the last 100+ years. And buried within the Clean Water Act of 1972 is Section 404 that provides protection for wetlands. And some states like New York have their own wetlands protection provisions, which are more stringent than those of the Federal Clean Water Act. And as a result, these birds, to the extent that they're birds of wetlands, and most of them nest in wetlands, are protected by the Clean Water Act. And then finally, the last ingredient in this conservation mix is a well-organized, well-funded, science-based conservation organization, Ducks Unlimited. They were early on purchasers of land before Nature Conservancy was doing that, wetlands in particular, extensive Ducks Unlimited wetlands across the North America, US and Canada. And at the same time, they partnered with the Fish and Wildlife Service to purchase properties to adjoin the Federal Wildlife Refuge System, which grew out of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and other acts. And I'm not a duck hunter, never have been. It's expensive to hunt ducks. If you do it seriously, you need good long guns, you need a well-trained dog, a boat, things like that. And so the folks that are Ducks Unlimited members, by and large, are probably well-heeled enough to provide funds to do this. Ducks Unlimited was the very first not-for-profit organization that was actually using this tool we call GPS, Geographic Information Systems, GIS, to map wetlands. So water birds, waterfowl are extensively protected in North America, and they've shown the results of that. You need some equipment that's beyond binoculars. Yes, you need binoculars to see these birds at a distance, usually 8 power by 42 millimeter objectives. But the expensive item is a spotting telescope, 20 power or more, so that you can see these ducks at a distance and identify what they are. So it's another level of commitment to bird study in terms of equipment. And then if you're a photographer and you're serious about it, a good camera, a good tripod, and a 1200 millimeter lens will do the best results. I am only able to afford a 600 millimeter lens for myself. But you can expand these, you can enlarge these things in Photoshop and get fair results, which is what I've done with my images. So this is the swan song, if you will. This is a trumpeter swan that my wife and I saw on Cayuga Lake near Cayuga a few years ago. And looking through binoculars, I saw it had this wing tag, we call it, K08. That means it's a tagged bird. Somebody, probably a state or federal agency, was able to capture this bird and put what we call a wing tag on it. And if you could see its legs, there would probably be bird bands on its legs. So I took this picture and sent it to what we call the Bird Banding Laboratory in Patuxent, Maryland, which is a branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and asked them where it came from. Simple enough question. They responded in just a few weeks. Turns out trumpeter swan number K08 was tagged at LaSalle Park, Ontario Province on 24 February 2013. And that's an area, a park just west of Kingston, not too far from Lake Ontario. Straight line distance as the swan flies between Kingston and Cayuga on the west side of Cayuga Lake is about 100 miles. So that's not much, and I'm sure it didn't do it all at one time. This is a bird that was unknown on Cayuga Lake until a few years ago. And it's the result of a reintroduction program that began in Ontario Province by the Canadian Wildlife Service in 1990, because the bird had been extirpated in Ontario in 1886, effectively. Now it's estimated that there's more than 1,000 of these birds, their offspring from introductions, and they've moved into New York State. So we have 2 or 3 reports each year of nesting trumpeter swans at the north end of the lake and on Montezuma National Refuge. So a success story in conservation. And it was fun for us to see it. What else? So that's it. Best wishes for hopefully a new and better year to come. And thank you for your time and attention. And by my clock, there's a few minutes left for questions if you have them.
Well, I've often noticed, Charlie, Canada geese browsing along in the grass alongside a pond or whatever. And I look closely to see what are they eating. And you can't really see what they're actually plucking up, but it's stems of grass, I take it.
Yeah, they're grazers. When they don't have waste corn kernels to eat, they'll get out on dry land and graze, literally.
You hardly can see any effect on the number of grass leaves. Don't find
No, not enough Canada geese to do any damage, but the snow geese is a whole different story. They nest, I guess, south and a little bit west of Hudson Bay, and they eat grass too. They're grazers. Their numbers have increased so much in the last few decades that you can see the bare areas where they've literally eaten all the grass that they can get from satellites, and they're mapping it, and it's extending. So the bag limit, as we call it, for white geese, which is the term that's used in the Fish and Wildlife Service, snow geese in this case, has increased, I think, to about 12 birds a day. And population still hasn't declined any as a result. So they've got plenty to eat, or had plenty to eat in Canada where they nest. What has released Canada geese and snow geese from the difficulties of winter weather and the shortages of food usually associated with winter is the availability of waste grains, mostly corn, some soybeans. In the wintertime on the Delmarva Peninsula south of here and in eastern North Carolina, where the acreages in corn have increased, probably as a result of the demand of corn for making ethanol a while back. And these birds benefit from the waste corn left behind by mechanical harvesting. A mechanical harvester leaves anywhere from 5 to 10% of the corn kernels behind in the field. It's just a big bird feeder. So you see all these cornfields as you go north toward Lansing and beyond. They're out there for corn as well as a duck feeder in the wintertime.
Charlie, this is Frank Moon.
Yes, Frank.
Yeah, last week my wife and I were walking down at Cass Park and we heard these gunshots. I assumed that they were waterfowl hunters, and is there hunting on this far south in Cayuga Lake, and what are they hunting for? And I don't see anybody with any duck retrieving dogs.
I can answer that question myself, Charlie, if you have any, it was given to you, but I've got some answers for it too.
Sure. What you did hear for sure, Frank, was gunshots, whether they were hunting or not. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, I don't know. Cass Park strikes me as unusual. I doubt they were hunting from Cass Park, but there is a hunting season for other areas around the lake if you have permission to get onto private land and set up a blind. And not all waterfowl hunters use dogs, but if they're hunting over water, they're not going to get what they take easily.
There are boats that go up and down Cayuga Lake here that hunters actually shoot from the boats.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's legal. It's kind of like
I'm not even,
backlighting deer from an automobile at night.
So what we encounter is that we live at the, can we get out of full screen here? Charlie,
Sure.
could you give up your,
Yeah, stop share. And stop share.
There you go.
okay, yes. So what it has to do with is that, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, that there was a regulation put in by the town or the city, and we're the first house on the southern end of Cayuga Lake on the west side, the first house. So we're backed up right against the wetlands. And what we found is that there was a regulation that then was overturned in court that had to do with the hunters parking their boats really close to the shoreline.
Right.
And a lot of us are residents down here, and it was not that was not it really wasn't that acceptable to have at sunrise the sound of many shotguns going off. But they pressed it in court, and we can no longer call the cops if they are in the water. So what they do is they drop anchor in like a foot of water along the edge of Cayuga Lake, put out all their decoys here at this southern end, and we awake to the sound of thunder during the hunting season. And they do the same thing quite often along the shore here. So I've seen them, about a half mile up the lake from us, where it's still fairly shallow along there, where they can anchor, put out their decoys, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So
if the boat's not moving, they can anchor and do that.
yeah,
We don't live out in the country, really. I live out in the country, and the two common sounds out here are chainsaws and gunfire. So
Right.
I wake up to chainsaws and gunfire a lot of days. It's just normal. At least they're not shooting at me. Yeah.
Well, that was how do you know that? How do you know that some of that shot doesn't come down on you? I didn't feel comfortable, so we got out of there.
Sure. That makes sense.
okay, Charlie.
I've seen, Mark, I've seen boats off of Cass Park, maybe 20 yards, and whether they were anchored or what, but I've seen hunting boats. We didn't actually see somebody in a boat hunting, but that I assume so.
Could we stop recording? Because I have something to say that I don't want on the record.